Now we come to the table of our Lord. We decided not to observe the sacrament last weekend, which is World Communion, which has been our tradition, but felt it would be better to do it on this day, the day in which we do dedicate, celebrate, and consecrate and reconsecrate ourselves to the Lord. 5 brief words as we prepare for the sacrament. Word 1, the greatest privilege of my professional life has been that of being your pastor for over half the history of this church. I could get very nostalgic, and as I reviewed many things in preparing this meditation, I came to tears of gratitude for you and those others that have been part of this ministry through these years. And now to be part of this transition as you complete these facilities, as you search for the new pastor, and in a year and 6 months from now, the baton will be passed to that person. What a privilege it is for Ann and me to be part of the life of this congregation, and you've loved us and others that have served with us and the staff through these years, and we say thank you. And next to my commitment to Christ and my commitment and love of Ann and our family and extended family, you are so important to us. But I'll move on. I could spend the entire time, but this is not about me. This is about God and you and us. Word number 2, don't forget that these buildings are only facilities. You've heard me say this before, and I will continue to. I took the building program of the early 80s so seriously that I was grinding my teeth, and Roger Riley here had to do occlusive work on me, and Ann would get me aside every so often and say, John, these are just buildings. They'll get paid for eventually, and people will finally agree on the sanctuary and what it will look like and the rest of this. And remember what facilities do, John. I said, what is that? They facilitate. They facilitate. The Temple of Solomon was grand, but it deteriorated and had to be rebuilt, refurbished many times, and finally was destroyed. And Herod the Great, almost 1,000 years later, had to rebuild the second temple. And the walls of Jerusalem went into disrepair, were battered down, rebuilt. And the fact is, buildings get torn down and new ones put in their place. They're temporary, even the best of them. I remember the church my dad served in Cambridge, Massachusetts, 100+ years old, Cornerstone Church, right on Mass Avenue, on the Arlington side of Cambridge from Harvard Square. And today I drive by that, and there is an apartment building there called Cornerstone Apartments. That's the only identity with the past, is the simple name Cornerstone on the apartment building. And one could say, what a tragedy. But not really, because those 14 years of ministry touched many, many lives. And today there's a generation dying, literally, in New England that was touched by that ministry. But as a result of the faithfulness of that Cornerstone Church, other churches have been started, and missionaries have gone out, and a work for Christ has gone on. And one of the strongest churches in New England today is Grace Chapel in Lexington, founded by 6 couples who were led to the Lord and nurtured by mom and dad in that Cornerstone ministry, and had a vision to not have to drive all the way into Cambridge. Their neighbors wouldn't do that. And they started a little chapel, and it's called Grace Chapel, one of the strongest churches in New England. Although you won't find Cornerstone Church anywhere, you'll find the work of Christ has gone on. And let's remember that. Buildings are only facilities. Word 3 as we come to the table. This weekend marks the beginning of a new future for St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church. The past is only prelude. It's important, but it's the past. And that's why we're not spending a lot of time talking about the past, because as much as it's good to look to the past and build on the past, you've got to look to the future and see what God has ahead here. Many, many years ago, the prophet Isaiah declared this word from the Lord. It reads, "Do not remember the former times or consider the things of old. I'm about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? That's a good word for us. You've taken this seriously, and it's exciting to see a congregation that has been as serious as, even it's a little disconcerting, for this next weekend, the implementation team is going to present ideas about worship for the future of St. Andrew's, and I hope you'll be part of that. But it has been some of the most senior citizens of this church that have insisted that we take seriously the future and endeavor by God's grace to reach a young generation. And to see these kids piling in here on Friday and yesterday in this room filled last night with young people, what a privilege. But it's threatening, it's challenging to do that. And the fact is that St. Andrew's will be dead in less than 10 years if we're simply trying to replicate or even continue the past. As you looked at your place in this city, you thought even of moving to another site. Some people suggested that as we had struggles as to whether we could build here on the site. Some said, let's get a large piece of land somewhere else and start over again, and we can have a great megachurch. But those thoughts didn't last very long, because in your wisdom you said, no, our ministry is here in Newport Beach and the greater harbor area, and we're committed to do that. On the front of the bulletin, you see what you came out with in terms of your core values and mission statement and vision for the future right here in this community. And there will be adjustments for all of us to make. I'm so grateful, though, for the generosity of those that are prepared to wrestle with these things. And Gordon MacDonald, a friend of mine, has written a book. It's titled, Who Stole My Church? What to Do When the Church You Love Tries to Enter the 21st Century. And you're going to hear more about this book. It's a book of fiction, except for two characters in the book, and that's the author, Gordon MacDonald, who did our Invention of Faith about 15 years ago, and his wife, Gail. And if you think the challenges of worship wars and styles of music and so forth are unique to our congregations, go on all over the United States today. And in this book, he simply writes describing a fictional congregation, but a very typical one, that endeavored to reach the younger generation and some of the tugs and pulls. And let me read his words of introduction that he wrote. Quote, you need to think about the fact that any church that's not turned its face toward the younger generation and the new challenges of reaching unchurched people in this world will simply cease to exist. We're not talking decades. We're talking just a few years. How many people of varying ages are feeling out of alignment with their churches today? Some of them think that their churches aren't adapting fast enough to the new realities, and others think their churches have simply changed too much. Sadly, more than a few at both of these extremes address the problem by just dropping out. Some stick in there, but take on the role of bitter critics, and they sap the strength of the community in their own way. End of quote. So, with enthusiasm, as we come to the table, yes, let's look back, but also let's be open as individuals and a congregation to what new things God is going to do in the future of St. Andrew's.